I have always been quiet. People call me timid, invisible, the one who never speaks up, the one who moves through a room without notice. I used to believe it was true that I was just small and remarkable, someone who could be overlooked. I used to think it was a flaw, but over the years, I learned it was a strength. Being unseen gave me an edge that nobody ever suspected. I could watch, I could learn, and nobody would know I was paying attention. People underestimate the quiet ones. They always do. They think silence means weakness. But sometimes silence is preparation. Sometimes it is patience. And sometimes, just sometimes, silence is power. It begins subtly, almost imperceptibly. My older sibling, the one everyone adored, the one whose laughter filled the rooms and whose charisma made people trust them instantly, had a way of drawing the spotlight. Everyone focused on them, on their charm, their easy confidence, their smile that never reached their eyes. And I, the quiet one, blended into the background, observing, storing details nobody else seemed to notice. The first time I realized something was off, I didn't know what I had found. I had been walking past the study, a room I was rarely allowed to enter, when I heard the faint sound of a voice. At first, I thought it was just a conversation, one of the many trivial things adults talk about when they think no one is listening. But there was a certain sharpness, a tension, a hushed urgency to the voice that drew me closer. My curiosity, that persistent trait nobody suspected, pulled me toward the slightly ajar door. I pressed myself against the wall outside, holding my breath. The words were muffled, but I caught fragments, pieces of a puzzle that I didn't yet know how to solve. Everything has to be ready. The others can't know. It's already in motion. I couldn't see them, and they didn't know I was listening. My heart beat faster. What were they talking about? I had to know. I had to find out. That single moment set off something in me, a spark that I couldn't extinguish. I realized then that what I was about to uncover could change everything. Not just for me, but for everyone in that house. From that night onward, I began to watch more carefully, to listen more intently. I memorized patterns, habits, schedules, and conversations. Every glance, every movement, every subtle pause became a clue. I followed them when they left the house, noting whom they met and where they went. I cataloged everything in my mind, mentally marking the patterns and inconsistencies. I had become the observer, the one who nobody thought was paying attention, and that would be my advantage. Weeks passed. I saw the way they spoke differently when others were on, how smiles sometimes faltered when a trusted friend wasn't paying attention, how hands shook ever slightly when a particular topic came up. I realized that my sibling was hiding something, a secret so large and well-guarded that no one could imagine it. And yet, it was right there, in plain sight. If only someone were looking closely enough. I was looking. Then came the night that changed everything. I had learned the password patterns, the way they picked codes, the way they organized their files. I found a folder on their computer labeled simply everything. At first, I hesitated. I didn't know if I was ready to open it, to confront what lay within. I could feel my pulse hammering in my chest. My hands shook, but I forced them to stay steady. I pressed enter, and the screen flickered to life. What I saw made my stomach drop. Documents, emails, contracts, all meticulously organized, all pointing to one thing: deception. Secret deals had been made, agreements signed, and promises broken, all while everyone in the house believed in the trustworthiness of my sibling. Money moved quietly. Gifts were given with strings attached, favors promised with hidden agendas. It was intricate, sophisticated, and cruel. They had spent months, possibly years, constructing a web of lies that nobody would ever suspect, and I had discovered it. I wanted to confront them immediately. I wanted to shout, to demand explanations, to tear apart the facade they had built. But I knew better. Impulse would ruin everything. I had to wait. I had to plan. I had to make sure that when the truth came out, it would land with impact, leaving no room for denial. Patience became my ally. I reminded myself that justice delayed is not justice denied, and I intended to make sure this revelation was unforgettable. Every day that followed, I collected more screenshots, recordings, photographs, snippets of conversations overheard by accident. Every piece of evidence strengthened my understanding of the web my sibling had woven. I began to notice the reactions of others to the subtle shifts in attention, the way people moved, the way trust was given and betrayed. It all pointed to the same conclusion. The world as I knew it was built on carefully constructed illusions. And the truth, once revealed, would shatter those illusions. I remember one evening, sitting in my room, surrounded by the collected proofs, feeling a strange mixture of fear and exhilaration. The weight of knowledge pressed on me. I knew I had power now, but it was not a power I wielded lightly. It had to be precise, deliberate, and timed perfectly. One wrong move and the entire structure could collapse prematurely, wasting the painstaking effort I had invested. I couldn't allow that. I had to be perfect. I had to be patient. I studied my siblings' habits meticulously, the times they were alone, the moments when the house was quiet, the exact second when their attention would falter. I built a mental map, plotting every opportunity for action. Midnight became a symbolic target. It was the hour of stillness, the hour when the world slows, when the darkness carries weight, and when a single revelation could have maximum impact. That was when I would act. That was when the silence I had carried for months would finally speak. I practiced the plan in my mind over and over. The sequence of emails, the timing of messages, the delivery of evidence, it all had to align perfectly. I imagined the reactions, the shock, the disbelief, the panic. The moment my sibling realized that the quiet one, the one they had always dismissed, had orchestrated everything, I allowed myself a small, secret thrill at the thought. Not vengeance, not anger, but satisfaction, the kind that comes from knowing that truth and patience had won. Every day, I forced myself to wait. Every tick of the clock reminded me that I was approaching the moment I had been preparing for. My pulse would quicken at the thought of exposure, and yet I calmed myself, breathing slowly, holding to the knowledge that restraint was as powerful as action. And in those quiet hours, I reflected on everything I had observed, the lies, the half-truths, the hidden agendas. It all pointed to one inevitable conclusion. The moment of revelation was coming, and nothing would ever be the same. I began to notice small patterns in behavior too. A flicker of unease when a certain subject was mentioned, the way my sibling avoided certain rooms or conversations, the way they monitored who entered the house and when. It all added to the evidence. Every detail mattered. Nothing was too small. I had learned to read subtle cues like an open book, to anticipate movements, to predict reactions. By the time midnight approached, I had built a detailed understanding of not just the hidden deal, but of the person who had orchestrated it. I would have moments of doubt, of course. What if the evidence wasn't enough? What if my timing failed? What if, in the moment of revelation, someone misinterpreted my intentions? But I pushed those thoughts aside. Fear, I realized, is only dangerous when it prevents action. I had to trust myself, my preparation, and the inevitability of truth. The days turned into nights, nights into weeks, and all the while, I waited. I watched the household continue its rhythm, oblivious to the storm that was quietly gathering. Waiting to strike, people smiled, they laughed, they argued. They cried, but none of them suspected that the quiet observer, the one who had always been overlooked, had everything planned. I had all the pieces, and soon the final act would begin. And then, one evening, the weight of the upcoming moment hit me more strongly than ever before. I sat in my room, staring at the collection of documents, feeling both anticipation and anxiety. The room was dimly lit, shadows stretching across the walls, as if the house itself was holding its breath. I realized then that everything depended on the next hours, on every precise action, on the moment when the clock struck 12, midnight. That was the hour of reckoning. That was the hour when the quietest voice would speak the loudest. The preparation, had been meticulous. Every message drafted, every file organized, every screenshot cataloged. I had rehearsed every step in my mind 1,000 times. I knew exactly how the revelation would unfold, who would see what, and the order in which the truth would hit. There was a certain calm in that knowledge. A quiet satisfaction in knowing that patience and observation were finally about to bear fruit. And yet, despite all the planning, a small part of me trembled with excitement. I was about to change everything. I was about to expose deception that had been carefully hidden from everyone. And when it happened, nothing would be the same again. The moment would be explosive, unforgettable, and perfectly timed. The quiet one, the invisible one, was about to become the one nobody could ignore. The days that followed were some of the longest of my life. Every moment in the house felt loaded, heavy with secrets nobody else could sense. I moved like a shadow, careful to keep my observations hidden. People continued their routines, oblivious to the fact that the quiet sibling they ignored was already holding the strings of the most powerful truth in the house. My sibling carried on, their confidence unshaken, unaware that the very person they had dismissed as insignificant had been watching, calculating, learning every move, every habit, every weakness. I found myself paying closer attention to the subtle things, the ones that slipped past most eyes. The way their smile faltered for half a second when a particular topic came up. The way their fingers tapped nervously on the table when a certain email arrived. The way they leaned closer to someone on the phone, lowering their voice, ensuring no one could overhear. These tiny actions were not meaningless. They were pieces of a puzzle I had been piecing together for weeks. At night, when the house was quiet and the others were asleep, I would sit at my desk, reviewing what I had collected. Every message, every file, every recording was scrutinized. I cross-referenced details, noticed patterns, and mapped relationships between people, deals, and secrets. I began to see the full scope of what my sibling had done. It was larger, more intricate, and more deliberate than I could have imagined. The deceit had been carefully cultivated over months, maybe even years, hidden behind smiles and polite gestures, and I had found it. I also began to understand why no one else had noticed. People trusted appearances. They trusted charm. They trusted confidence. But appearances, as I had learned, can be manufactured, confidence can be staged, and smiles can be the most dangerous disguise of all. I had to remember that. Because my siblings' world was built entirely on these facades. And when the truth came out, those facades would crumble. One evening, I followed them outside, not in a confrontational way, but quietly, observing from a distance. They met someone in a darkened corner of the street, someone they spoke with in hushed tones. I couldn't catch all the words, but the gestures, the careful way they exchanged a small envelope told me everything I needed to know. The deal wasn't just hidden at home. It extended beyond the walls, reaching into places no one would suspect. I had to understand every layer of it before I acted. Back in my room, I spread out the pieces I had collected, lining them up like evidence on a table. Emails, documents, screenshots, photographs. Small notes, every detail meticulously arranged. I began to see the threads connect, the way one lie led to another, the way one betrayal supported the next. My siblings' web of deception was intricate, but it was not infallible. And I, the quiet observer, had found the weak points, the openings, the small cracks that could bring everything down. The planning became almost an obsession. Every day, I rehearsed sequences in my mind, how to release the evidence, how to make sure it reached the right people in the right order, how to ensure that the timing would maximize the impact. I imagined their face when the first piece of truth hit them, when they realized that I had known all along. The thought made my pulse quicken, not out of anger, but out of the power of knowing that patience and observation were finally about to pay off. There were nights I lay awake, staring at the ceiling, thinking about what would happen once the truth came out. Would people be angry? Would they be shocked? Would my sibling try to hide, to escape, to explain? None of it mattered. The truth, once released, could not be ignored. It was a force that demanded acknowledgement, and I would be the one to release it. During these nights, I also reflected on my own patience. I had learned the value of restraint. Every time I had wanted to confront my sibling, every time I had wanted to reveal that I knew, I had held back. I had let the silence grow, letting the tension build, and with each passing day, the impact of the eventual revelation became stronger. I realized that patience was not weakness. Patience was power. I also began to notice the reactions of others in the household. My sibling interacted with people differently when they thought no one was watching. They whispered. They hesitated. They masked their true intentions with practiced ease. And yet, I noticed the tiniest inconsistencies: the slight pause before a lie, the subtle flinch when someone mentioned a name, the quick glance toward a door. These tiny moments were like threads unraveling, and I pulled on them silently, collecting everything I could. One afternoon, I discovered a hidden folder on their personal computer. It was protected with a password, one they assumed I could never guess, but I had been observing long enough to understand their patterns. Using what I had learned, I gained access. Inside were detailed plans, spreadsheets, and notes that outlined the secret deal in full. It was overwhelming, almost too much to comprehend in one sitting. The amount of deception, the careful planning, the cold calculation, it was shocking. And yet, I felt a calm satisfaction. I had found what I needed. As I reviewed the documents, I also reflected on my own role. I had always been quiet, always overlooked. But now I realized that my silence had been a strategy all along. It allowed me to see what others could not. It allowed me to collect proof, to understand the scope of the deception, and to prepare for the moment when I would act. I felt a quiet pride, tempered by the gravity of what was to come. This was not just about me. It was about exposing truth, about ensuring that lies no longer had power over people who trusted blindly. I began to construct a timeline, mapping every interaction, every secret transaction, every hidden agreement. I cross-referenced messages, notes, and observations. Every thread led to another, and the pattern became clear. The deception was systematic, deliberate, and far-reaching. It touched not only me but others in ways they would never have suspected. And the more I learned, the more determined I became to reveal it. The anticipation grew as midnight approached. I had chosen this arc carefully. It was quiet, solitary. The moment when the world paused, I knew that timing was critical. One wrong move, and the revelation could be diluted or misunderstood. But at midnight, the power of the truth would be undeniable, the shock would be immediate, and the impact absolute. I rehearsed the plan mentally over and over. I imagined sending the evidence, piece by piece, in a precise sequence. Each recipient would receive the information at the exact moment that would maximize the effect. I imagined the reactions: the disbelief, the anger, the confusion, the sudden recognition of betrayal. And I imagined my siblings' face when they realized that the one they had dismissed as insignificant had orchestrated the exposure flawlessly, even with all this planning. I felt a thrill of excitement that was impossible to contain. I was about to change everything, to alter the balance of power in a household built on lies. The quiet sibling, the invisible observer, would become the force that no one could ignore. And in that thought, I felt a surge of quiet satisfaction, tempered by the knowledge that the responsibility was immense. Every detail mattered. Every timing, every placement, every method of delivery had to be exact. I double-checked everything, again and again. The house itself seemed to hold its breath. As if sensing that something monumental was about to occur, my sibling continued with their day, oblivious to the storm I had been building in silence, confident that nothing could disrupt the carefully constructed world they had created. I also reflected on the lessons I had learned during this process. Patience, observation, restraint. These were not passive traits. They were tools, weapons even, that allowed me to see clearly, to act deliberately. and to ensure that justice would be delivered without compromise. I had grown in ways I had never anticipated, understanding that the quiet ones often hold the most power, precisely because no one expects it. And so, as midnight approached, I felt a strange combination of anxiety and calm. The evidence was ready. The plan was perfected. Every detail was accounted for, and in a few hours, everything would change. The deception that had been carefully hidden, the lies that had been perpetuated behind smiles and charm would be exposed. And the world, or at least this house, would never be the same again. The days grew heavier as the plan progressed. I moved through the house like a ghost, my presence unnoticed, my attention fixed on every subtle movement. My sibling carried on with the ease of someone who believed the world revolved around them. They laughed, they spoke, they charmed, and everyone else, as usual, fell into their orbit. But I was watching, always watching. Every smile, every hesitation, every micro-expression that betrayed a hidden thought, I noted it all. I had learned to read people in ways that most couldn't imagine. Even the smallest gestures carried meaning. I discovered how carefully my sibling curated their image. Even their friends, those who thought they were trusted confidants, were unaware of the layers of deceit. Some were pawns in a game they didn't even know existed. Others were kept in the dark while being subtly manipulated. Their loyalties shifted without them realizing it, and I, the quiet observer, was cataloging it all. The irony was not lost on me. I had always been dismissed as powerless, and yet I held the understanding that could unravel everything. One afternoon, I noticed a subtle pattern in their interactions with certain individuals. There were secret signals, brief touches, slight shifts in posture, the faintest cues that indicated covert communication. Most people would never have noticed, but I did, and with each observation, the pieces of the puzzle fell into place. The more I watched, the more clearly I could see how deep the deception ran. I began to spend hours reviewing the files and evidence I had collected. Every document, every email, every recorded conversation was analyzed in painstaking detail. I cross-referenced dates, locations, and names, ensuring that every connection was clear and irrefutable. I wanted my revelation to be undeniable. There could be no room for doubt, no opportunity for excuses or denials. The truth had to strike with precision. And yet, despite all this planning, I felt the growing weight of anticipation. The truth I was about to reveal was not just shocking, it was transformative. It would shake the foundations of the household, altering relationships, loyalties, and perceptions, and the responsibility of delivering it weighed heavily on me. I had to ensure that it was done correctly, that the timing was perfect, and that no one could deflect or escape the consequences. During these days, I also paid closer attention to my own reactions. I had to maintain composure to appear ordinary and remarkable, while inside, my mind was working relentlessly. Every heartbeat, every breath was synchronized with the unfolding plan. I reminded myself that any sign of anxiety, any hint that I knew more than I appeared to, could jeopardize the entire strategy. I had to remain invisible, even as I held the power to change everything. I discovered a few more hidden files that my sibling had overlooked. These contained additional details of the secret deals, names, amounts, agreements. I felt a cold satisfaction as I realized that nothing had escaped my notice. Every lie, every hidden action had been cataloged and stored, ready to be revealed at the perfect moment. And that moment was approaching. One evening, I overheard a conversation that confirmed the final piece of the puzzle. My sibling spoke in hushed tones to someone over the phone, mentioning names I had already documented, discussing timelines and contingencies. I pressed myself against the wall outside the room, heart pounding, and listened carefully. The words were precise, deliberate, and confident, but they were also vulnerable. The truth had a way of slipping through even the most carefully guarded lips, and I had been listening, I retreated to my room afterward, feeling the familiar mix of excitement and dread. The final pieces were falling into place. I could see the sequence clearly now, the order in which the revelation would unfold, the precise timing that would ensure maximum impact. It was all meticulously planned. Every email, every message, every piece of evidence would be delivered at exactly the right moment, and the reactions would be immediate, inevitable, and undeniable. I spent the next few days rehearsing in my mind. I imagined sending the first message, the ripple effect that would follow, the shock that would spread through the house. I visualized my siblings' expression the moment they realized that the quiet, overlooked one had orchestrated everything. I imagined the whispers, the confusion, the sudden recognition of betrayal. And with each rehearsal, my resolve grew stronger. I knew that the moment of revelation would be perfect. Even with all this preparation, I couldn't ignore the nervous thrill that coursed through me. It was a strange sensation. A mixture of anticipation, excitement, and a deep sense of responsibility. I was about to alter the course of everything, to expose lies that had been carefully hidden, and to reveal the truth that no one else had noticed. The weight of it was immense, but so was the satisfaction of knowing that I was ready. I began to pay closer attention to my siblings' routines. I noted the times when they were most vulnerable, the moments when they least expected observation. I identified the hours when the house would be quietest, when the impact of exposure would be greatest. Midnight was no longer just a symbolic target. It was the precise hour when the culmination of all my efforts would unfold. I also reflected on the moral dimension of what I was about to do. This was not revenge in the sense of anger or malice. This was correction, restoration, and justice. The lies, the betrayals, the manipulations, they had consequences. And it was my responsibility to ensure that those consequences were realized. I reminded myself that truth, once revealed, could not be ignored, and I would be the one to reveal it. As midnight approached, the tension in the house became almost palpable. I noticed subtle changes in behavior, nervous glances, hurried movements, whispered conversations. My sibling, as always, believed they were in control, unaware that the quiet one had already mastered the sequence of events that would soon bring everything to light. I felt a mixture of calm and exhilaration. The time was near. The final act was approaching. I reviewed the evidence one last time. Every email, every screenshot, every document was checked, cross-referenced, and sequenced. I knew exactly who would receive each piece of information and in what order. The dominoes were set, and all that remained was to push the first one. I imagined the ripple effect, the shock spreading, the realization dawning, and I felt a quiet, intense satisfaction at knowing that I had prepared everything flawlessly. The night itself seemed to hold its breath. The house was quiet, shadows stretching across the walls, the faint hum of the city outside barely audible. I sat at my desk, heart racing, reviewing the final details of the plan. Every aspect was perfect, every timing precise, every message ready to be sent. I felt the weight of anticipation, the thrill of the impending revelation, and the knowledge that everything I had observed, learned, and documented was about to have its moment. I thought about the past, about how I had been dismissed, overlooked, underestimated, and I realized that all that time, all that patience had prepared me for this moment. The quiet sibling, the invisible one, was about to become the one who could not be ignored, and the truth, once revealed, would leave no room for denial. And then, in those final hours before midnight, I allowed myself a brief reflection. I thought about the nature of trust, about the fragility of appearances, about the power of observation and patience. I understood that people are often blinded by charm and confidence, by the facades that others carefully construct. But I had seen beyond the surface. I had noticed the cracks, the inconsistencies, the signs that everyone else missed. And now, with the moment approaching, those cracks would become the foundation of the revelation. The anticipation was almost unbearable. Every passing minute brought me closer to the hour when the truth would strike. when the carefully hidden secrets would be exposed, and when the world of deception would be shattered. I felt a mixture of excitement, anxiety, and determination. I was ready. The time had come. The quiet one, the observer, the overlooked sibling, would finally act, and everything would change. Midnight approached faster than I had expected. The house had fallen into a near-perfect stillness. The faint hum of distant traffic and the soft creak of floorboards the only interruptions. I sat at my desk, staring at the evidence spread before me, my hand hovering over the keyboard. Every detail, every piece of proof, had been rehearsed in my mind countless times. The plan was flawless. I just had to act. One keystroke would set everything in motion. I imagined my sibling walking down the hall unaware, laughing at some joke, their confidence unshaken. They had no idea how carefully I had observed them, how meticulously I had collected every hidden message, every secret agreement. They believed themselves untouchable, above suspicion. And yet, here I was, holding the culmination of months of patience, observation, and careful planning. The irony was almost poetic. I took a deep breath and pressed send on the first batch of messages. Emails and files were dispatched to the intended recipients, each time to hit simultaneously for maximum effect. Almost immediately, notifications began to appear. Phones buzzed across the house, screens lit up, whispers started to fill the air as people realized something was happening. The ripple of shock was instantaneous, spreading like a wave. I stayed in my seat, calm on the outside, though my heart raced with exhilaration. Each notification confirmed that the plan was working, that the truth was hitting with the force I had anticipated. I could hear the muffled gasps from other rooms, the hurried footsteps, the scrambling to understand. I imagined the confusion, the panic, the sudden awareness of betrayal. And I felt a quiet satisfaction. This was the moment I had been waiting for. From my vantage point, I could see my siblings' reaction. They appeared first calm, as though nothing had happened. But within seconds, confusion crept in. Their eyes widened, their expression faltered, and the confident mask they had worn for so long began to crack. They moved quickly from room to room, trying to intercept phones, to explain, to contain the situation. But it was too late. The truth was already everywhere, admissible, undeniable. I observed silently as people in the house reacted to the revelations. Faces twisted in shock, disbelief, and anger. Conversations erupted, voices overlapping as the secrets I had uncovered spread like wildfire. My sibling tried to speak, to interject, to mitigate the damage, but the evidence was overwhelming. There was no room for denial, no opportunity to twist the narrative. Every lie, every secret, every hidden transaction was now laid bare. I felt a strange mixture of satisfaction and solemnity as I watched the chaos unfold. This was not vengeance in the traditional sense. It was justice. The deception had to be exposed. People needed to see the truth, and I had been the one to deliver it. The careful planning, the patience, the long months of observation, all of it had led to this moment, and the impact was exactly what I had envisioned. As the night deepened, I continued to monitor the situation. My siblings' attempts to regain control were futile. The house was filled with whispers, questioning looks, and the palpable tension of shattered trust. The deals they had thought secret, the agreements they had believed hidden, were now exposed in full clarity. The power they had wielded through deception was gone, replaced by confusion and realization. I reflected on how far I had come. Once I had been overlooked, underestimated, dismissed as insignificant. Now I was the one who held the understanding, the evidence, and the control over the narrative. The quiet observer had become the orchestrator, the invisible hand guiding the revelation of truth. And in that transformation, I found a deep sense of empowerment and clarity. The chaos in the house intensified as more evidence surfaced. Emails detailing secret agreements, screenshots of private conversations, documents outlining hidden transactions, all were being reviewed by the recipients in real time. People's expressions changed from confusion to shock to disbelief. Some attempted to rationalize, others confronted my sibling directly, demanding explanations. But the truth was unassailable. Every detail had been meticulously documented, every thread of deceit exposed. I continued to sit quietly, a witness to the unraveling of a carefully constructed illusion. I watched my siblings' confidence crumble, their attempts at control failing with each passing minute. The calm exterior they had maintained for so long was gone, replaced by visible panic, frustration, and the dawning realization that they had underestimated me. The quiet sibling, the one they had ignored, had orchestrated the exposure perfectly in the midst of the chaos. I felt a strange mixture of emotions. There was satisfaction, of course, in knowing that justice had been served. There was relief in seeing the truth finally acknowledged. But there was also a sense of solemnity, a recognition of the gravity of the situation. Relationships had been altered, trust had been broken, and the household would never be the same. The impact of the revelation was total and irreversible. I took a moment to reflect on the process that had led to this point. Months of careful observation, meticulous planning, and patient waiting had culminated in a single moment of undeniable truth. Every decision, every calculation, every act of restraint had been essential. I realized then that patience is not passive, it is active, deliberate, and powerful. The quiet observer, when armed with knowledge and foresight, can wield influence far beyond what others anticipate. As the first waves of shock began to settle, I began to anticipate the aftermath. People were processing the revelations, confronting their own assumptions, and beginning to navigate the complex emotions that truth often brings. Some sought to distance themselves from my sibling. Others questioned their own judgments, and some struggled to reconcile the person they had believed with the person revealed by the evidence. And throughout it all, I remained calm, observing, understanding, and aware of the full scope of what had been accomplished. My sibling eventually approached me, their expression a mixture of confusion, frustration, and dawning realization. They searched for words, for explanations, for some way to regain control, but none were sufficient. I met their gaze calmly, silently. No words were necessary. The look on my face, the quiet certainty, conveyed everything. The orchestrator had been revealed. The quiet sibling had spoken, and the truth had been delivered with precision. I watched as they retreated, finally understanding the depth of my preparation, the careful attention to detail, and the inevitability of the exposure. The power dynamic had shifted completely. The house, once ruled by charm, deception, and manipulation, now acknowledged the force of truth and preparation. And in that shift, I felt a deep sense of fulfillment, not out of cruelty, not out of vengeance, but from the knowledge that justice had been served, that deceit could no longer hide behind appearances, and that observation and patience had proven stronger than arrogance and lies. The night stretched on, filled with conversations, confrontations, and quiet reflections. I continued to monitor the situation, noting reactions, documenting outcomes, and ensuring that the evidence remained unassailable. The hidden deal had been exposed in full clarity, and the repercussions were already unfolding. I felt a profound sense of responsibility for what I had initiated. The truth is a heavy burden, and I carried it with care, precision, and awareness of its impact. As the early hours approached, I allowed myself a brief moment of reflection. I thought about how long I had waited, how carefully I had observed, how meticulously I had prepared. I thought about the patience that had carried me through weeks of planning, and the restraint that had ensured the timing was perfect. I understood fully that the quiet observer can be the most powerful agent in any situation, capable of orchestrating change and exposing hidden truths when others least expect it. And in that stillness, I realized the full scope of the transformation. I had been dismissed, overlooked, underestimated, yet through observation, patience, and careful preparation, I had become the one whose actions would resonate far beyond the immediate moment. The truth had been delivered, justice had been enacted, and the house and everyone in it would never be the same again. I sat back in my chair, feeling the weight of the night settle around me. The exposure was complete. The ripple of reactions had begun. My sibling, once confident and untouchable, now understood the consequences of underestimating me, and I, the quiet observer, had fulfilled the plan I had set in motion months ago. The house would never forget the night the truth rose from silence. The hours after midnight felt surreal. The house had been transformed in ways that were impossible to ignore. Where there had once been calm routines, casual laughter, and polite interactions, now there was tension, whispers, and a strange sense of caution. People moved differently, spoke differently, their trust fractured. The hidden deal I had exposed had altered the balance of the household entirely. Every glance, every conversation carried weight, because the truth had shifted everything. I stayed in my room for a while, watching the reactions from the shadows, observing without interference. I saw my sibling trying to regain composure, trying to explain, trying to justify, but the evidence was undeniable. Every lie, every hidden agreement, every carefully crafted manipulation had been revealed, and there was no way to reclaim control. Their confidence had been replaced by uncertainty, their charisma overshadowed by the clarity of truth. I felt a complex mix of emotions as I watched. Part of me felt satisfaction. Of course, a quiet triumph, for patience, for careful observation, for strategic action. But there was more than that. I felt the weight of responsibility, knowing that the truth I had revealed would forever alter relationships, expectations, and perceptions. This was not just about justice. It was about consequence. The truth has power, and power carries responsibility. The people in the house began confronting each other, their voices sharp with confusion and hurt. Conversations that had once been casual were now loaded with suspicion. Some demanded explanations from my sibling. Others sought to understand the depth of the deception, and I observed silently, noting reactions, processing every nuance. Every word, every gesture revealed more about the impact of the secrets, more about the fractures hidden beneath the surface for so long. I found myself thinking about my own journey over the past months. How often had I been overlooked? How often had my silence been mistaken for weakness? Yet, all that time, I had been preparing, observing, and learning. Patience had been my weapon, restraint my shield, and attention my strategy. And now, after months of careful planning, I had acted, and the results were undeniable. I had become the one whose actions mattered, whose presence could not be ignored, whose voice, though silent for so long, had finally been heard. By early morning, the household was a mix of quiet reflection and ongoing discussion. My sibling moved through the rooms with a heavy step, attempting to repair what was broken. But the fractures were too deep. Trust, once lost, cannot be easily regained. People looked to me, some with awe, others with quiet suspicion, realizing that I had been the orchestrator of the revelation. The quiet sibling they had dismissed held the power now. I thought about the lessons I had learned. Observation is a form of power. Silence is not weakness. Patience and preparation can achieve results that force, confrontation, or anger cannot. And timing is everything. The careful orchestration of actions, the anticipation of reactions, and the precise execution of plans can change outcomes in ways that are permanent, undeniable, and transformative. Throughout the morning, I reflected on the consequences of the exposure. The hidden deals had been revealed, the lies laid bare, and the manipulations exposed. Some relationships were strained, others irreparably altered, and yet the clarity brought by truth was undeniable. People could no longer be deceived by appearances alone. They had seen the depth of the hidden reality, and I had been the one to guide that revelation, even in the quiet moments. I felt the intensity of what had occurred. I replayed every step. In my mind, every decision, every calculation. I considered what could have gone wrong, what might have been overlooked, and yet the execution had been flawless. The evidence had landed precisely as intended, the reactions unfolded as anticipated, and the impact was complete. Months of patience and observation had culminated in a single moment that could never be undone. I also reflected on the changes within myself. I had always been quiet, reserved, overlooked, and yet, through careful observation and preparation, I had found a voice, a power, a capability I had not realized I possessed. The experience had taught me about resilience, about the subtle influence of understanding and timing, and about the transformative potential of patience and strategy. By midday, the initial chaos had begun to settle. People were processing, reflecting, and adjusting to the new reality. Conversations were quieter, but more cautious. Glances carried weight, and actions were measured. The household was no longer the same. The dynamics had shifted irreversibly. I remained calm, observing the long-term effects, noting how the revelation had altered behavior, expectations, and relationships. My sibling, once confident and unassailable, moved through the house with a new awareness. They approached me with hesitation, searching for explanations, trying to regain footing, but the reality was clear. The quiet sibling they had overlooked had seen, understood, and acted. The power had shifted. And in that shift, there was a profound sense of justice, not from cruelty or anger, but from the undeniable weight of truth. I spent the afternoon reviewing the aftermath, noting how each person reacted and how the relationships would likely evolve. Some were defensive, some contemplative, others hesitant to engage. The impact of the exposure was still unfolding, and I understood that the consequences would continue to ripple through the household for days, weeks, even months. The truth, once revealed, cannot be ignored or contained. Even as the day wore on, I felt the quiet satisfaction of completion. The evidence had been delivered flawlessly, the reactions were precisely as anticipated, and the power of observation, patience, and timing had been proven. I had fulfilled the plan I had set in motion months ago, and the results were undeniable. The quiet sibling had become the orchestrator, the one whose presence and actions could no longer be overlooked. As evening approached, I reflected on the moral implications of what had occurred. This was not about vengeance. It was about restoring balance, revealing deception, and ensuring accountability. Lies, no matter how carefully constructed, cannot withstand the scrutiny of patience, observation, and truth. I had learned that, and I had acted on it. And in doing so, I had shifted the equilibrium of the household, leaving a lasting impression of what careful strategy and deliberate action can achieve. I also reflected on the nature of trust. Trust is fragile, built over time, and easily broken. The exposure of the hidden deals reminded everyone that appearances can be deceiving, that confidence and charm do not always reflect integrity. And I realized that, in observing, waiting, and preparing, I had been honoring the importance of trust by ensuring that lies no longer held sway. The night settled around the house, quiet once more, but different. The energy had shifted, the dynamics altered. My sibling moved through the rooms, aware now of the consequences of their actions, and I observed silently, content in the knowledge that truth had prevailed. Patience, observation, and timing had been my allies, and they had ensured that justice, in its most deliberate form, had been enacted. I allowed myself a moment of reflection, thinking about how I had changed. The experience had strengthened my awareness, sharpened my focus, and revealed a depth of capability I had not previously understood. I had learned the power of silence, the value of patience, and the impact of careful observation, and I had seen firsthand how deliberate, strategic action can reshape reality in profound and lasting ways. By the time the household settled into a tentative calm, I felt a quiet sense of fulfillment. The plan was complete, the exposure had been executed flawlessly, and the consequences were unfolding exactly as anticipated. I had remained the quiet observer, the invisible sibling, and yet I had orchestrated a revelation that would be remembered. The house, its relationships, and its dynamics had shifted permanently, and I had been the catalyst. In those quiet moments, I considered what lay ahead. The immediate chaos had passed. but the long-term impact would continue to unfold. People would adjust, relationships would recalibrate, and the lessons of trust, deception, and observation would resonate for a long time. I had acted as a guide for that process, and the responsibility was not lost on me. I had seen the full scope of deception and taken deliberate action to restore balance, ensuring that truth and accountability prevailed. The days that followed the revelation were quieter, though far from peaceful. The household had shifted. There was an unspoken awareness in every glance, a carefulness in every word. The chaos of midnight had faded, but its effects lingered. People moved differently, measured their speech, and paused where they once would have spoken freely. I observed it all, quietly, patiently, noting how the ripple of truth continued to spread. My sibling had changed too, their confidence tempered, their charm now shadowed by the realization that even the most carefully hidden actions can be exposed. It was strange. Sitting in my room one afternoon, thinking about the path that had led me here, I remembered the nights of observation, the months of meticulous planning, the quiet patience I had practiced. At times, I had doubted myself, wondered if I would be able to carry through the plan without error, without discovery. But every moment of doubt had been necessary. Every pause, every careful noted had all led to this outcome. The quiet sibling had acted, and the world had shifted in response. I also thought about the lessons embedded in the experience. Patience, observation, and restraint are not weaknesses. They are forms of strength that can wield power quietly but effectively. I had been underestimated, overlooked, dismissed as insignificant. And yet, through deliberate action and careful timing, I had achieved something profound. It was not just about exposing deception. It was about demonstrating that truth, prepared and delivered with precision, has an unstoppable force. My sibling approached me one afternoon, quieter now, slower, their voice careful. Vengerberg. They began. I see now. I underestimated. You were always watching. You knew everything. I looked at them calmly, the weight of months of preparation reflected in my gaze. No words were needed to convey the understanding between us. The acknowledgement was enough. There was a shift in power, yes, but also a recognition of skill, patience, and determination. As they left, I felt a mix of emotions, satisfaction, relief, and a deep sense of responsibility. I had delivered truth, and with it, accountability. But the experience had taught me something more profound: the importance of moral clarity, of acting not out of anger or vengeance, but out of purpose and understanding. The world often rewards charm, confidence, and appearances, but these are fragile. Observation, patience, and deliberate action endure. I walked through the house, quietly noting the subtle changes. People interacted differently, more cautiously, yet more honestly. The atmosphere was lighter in some ways, heavier in others. Trust, once blind, now carried awareness. Lies no longer had free rein, and even my sibling, who had once been so skilled in deception, now moved with caution, aware that actions carry consequences, and that truth cannot be permanently hidden. In the days that followed, I continued my quiet observations. Though the intensity had eased, the household was adjusting, relationships recalibrating, and the long-term effects of the midnight revelation were becoming clearer. People were learning, slowly, that trust is earned, and that appearances can be deceiving. I reflected on how patience and careful preparation had guided this process, ensuring that truth was not only revealed, but also recognized and understood. I also considered the personal growth I had experienced. I had always been quiet, reserved, seemingly powerless, but I had discovered the strength inherent in observation, restraint, and strategy. I had learned that influence is not always loud or visible, that careful planning can achieve outcomes that impulsive action cannot, and that the quietest voice can, at the right moment, carry the greatest weight. There were moments, late at night, when I reflected on the moral dimensions of my actions. Some might have seen my plan as manipulative, as a form of retribution, but it was never that. My goal was truth, accountability, and the restoration of clarity in a household clouded by deceit in observing, planning, and executing the exposure. I had acted with intention, and the results, though dramatic, were justified. Lies were confronted, deception dismantled, and awareness restored. As the household slowly settled into a new rhythm, I realized that the night of the revelation had changed more than just relationships. It had shifted perspectives, attitudes, and understanding. People were thinking differently, questioning assumptions, and approaching interactions with more care. I had not only exposed a hidden deal, I had shown that truth, patience, and careful action could bring clarity to situations clouded by deception. I spent a quiet afternoon reviewing the evidence one last time. Everything had been accounted for. Every document, every message, every subtle observation had served its purpose. And as I set aside the files, I felt a sense of completion. A profound understanding that the work of observation and patience had come to fruition. The household was different now, but for the first time, it operated under a clarity that had been absent for so long. My sibling approached me again, this time with a quieter demeanor. More reflective. They did not speak immediately, but simply nodded, an acknowledgement of both my actions and the lessons implicit in them. I realized then that the power dynamics had shifted permanently. Respect, not fear or charm, was now the currency. Observation, patience, and strategic action had demonstrated their enduring value. I thought about my own journey and the lessons I had learned. Patience is strength. Silence is strategy. Observation is a weapon more precise than any confrontation. Timing is critical, and when truth is delivered deliberately, it carries an impact that cannot be ignored. I had lived these lessons and seen their effects firsthand. The quiet sibling, once overlooked, had become a force that reshaped the household entirely. As the weeks passed, the household continued to adjust. Conversations became more thoughtful, relationships more cautious, and awareness replaced blind trust. People began to see the importance of accountability, the fragility of appearances, and the strength inherent in careful observation. I watched all of this quietly, content in the knowledge that the impact of my actions would endure. There were moments when my siblings sought reconciliation, asking questions, offering explanations. Trying to understand the depth of my insight, I listened, offering guidance, observation, and measured responses. It was not about humiliation or punishment, but about restoring balance, fostering awareness, and ensuring that the lessons of trust, deception, and truth were internalized. I also reflected on the personal growth I had experienced through this journey. I had learned about resilience, about the power of quiet observation, about the impact of careful planning and timing. I had discovered that the most profound influence is often exerted quietly, invisibly, and that the effects of deliberate, patient action can outlast and outweigh impulsive confrontation. The household, though forever changed, settled into a new rhythm. Trust, though cautious, began to rebuild, relationships adjusted, and awareness became the guiding principle. I felt a quiet pride in knowing that the midnight revelation had not been merely dramatic, but transformative. The power of truth, carefully prepared and delivered, had reshaped perceptions, altered behavior, and restored balance. And in the stillness of my room one evening, I allowed myself a final reflection. I thought about the journey from quiet observation to deliberate action, from overlooked sibling to orchestrator of truth. I realized that patience, restraint, and careful planning are not merely tactics, they are philosophies of life. They allow the quiet to be heard, the overlooked to act, and the prepared to change the course of events. I understood, finally, that my actions were not just about revealing a hidden deal or exposing deceit. They were about asserting the value of truth, the importance of observation, and the power inherent in patience. Lies can flourish when unchallenged, but when confronted deliberately and strategically, they collapse, and clarity prevails. And I had been the instrument of that clarity. The household continued its daily life, altered yet functioning, aware yet cautious, My sibling had changed, others had learned, and I had grown. The quiet observer had transformed into a force that could not be ignored, a presence defined by patience, precision, and understanding. The midnight revelation had been a turning point, and its lessons would resonate far beyond that single night. As I prepared for the night ahead, reflecting on the journey and the growth it had brought, I felt a profound sense of calm. The plan had been executed flawlessly, the consequences had unfolded as intended, and the lessons had been taught. I realized that true power does not come from loud confrontation, from rage, or from impulsive action. True power comes from observation, preparation, and the deliberate application of truth at the perfect moment. And so, as the moon rose high and the household settled into the quiet rhythm of the evening, I understood the full depth of what had been accomplished. Justice, clarity, and awareness had been delivered. Relationships had been tested and recalibrated. Lies had been dismantled, and the truth, once concealed, now stood undeniable. And I, the quiet sibling, the overlooked observer, had become the catalyst for change, the orchestrator of revelation, and the guardian of truth.